Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying.
Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon Podcast. Stay humble, eh? That was a lot of fun on Sunday. We're going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about that sort of stuff. This is coming out on Tuesday or late on Monday. We're going to completely segment the transfer stuff. There will be a live, which will probably be out. You'll probably be watching this after, which we can go back and watch on the Cannon Podcast YouTube channel, or you can check it out on Spotify and stuff. It'll be posted on there as well. So if you want to hear our thoughts on the transfer stuff, we are completely segmenting it. Frankly, because right now, as of, I think it's 5:39 on Monday, I don't want to talk about it. So we will leave that there. So yeah, if you want to hear about transfers and stuff, that will be out on the live. We are here to talk about the fun stuff and the fun that happened on Sunday afternoon against Man City. And I'm here with my two boys. We've got a full house with George. Hello, George.
Hello, good sir.
And Icky Wiki Wohan. Hi, darling. You okay?
Hi, how are you? How are you two?
I am, yes. We won't talk about the elephant in the room. This is going to be a fun pod. It's going to be a fun pod.
Yeah,
I want to
talk about the game. I just want to talk about
on Sunday afternoon, because transfers don't matter. Right, George? Right?
Yeah, you say it enough, it'll be true.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for checking out the Cannon Podcast. If you're here for the first time, make sure you like and subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you do all those good things, reviews on Spotify, subscribe to us, etc. Thank you for being here. The content machine rolls on. Check out all the exclusive stuff we do as well. If you want to become a Patreon member, you can do that. But that's enough housekeeping. Let's get on with it. Arsenal beat Man City 5-1 on Sunday afternoon in a unbelievable performance at the Emirates. Probably my favourite game of the season so far, I would say. One of my favourite games under Mikel Arteta. George, we'll start with you. It was a really, really fun afternoon for so many reasons. There was the stay humble narrative. There was the feeling that City gave up at the end of that game, which I haven't seen in a long time. There was the youth aspect. There was the Emirates crowd. There was the kind of the performances. There was the fact we took, I think it was 5 open play goals. There's so many positives on Sunday afternoon. We're trying to put the transfer stuff aside. How did you feel? How did you react to that on Sunday afternoon?
Simply, it's very easy for me to put it aside because there were so many positive. I think like if you actually want to go through that game and you actually want to sit there, reflect and understand what it means. I kind of was saying this on the live and you mentioned it there. Manchester City and Pep gave up. Go back throughout his history and I can't name a time his team have given up in a match. And I don't remember a time when any coach or any team has been able to submit Manchester City. It's always seemed like every team in the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years has at some point experienced a 5-0, a 5-1, except for Pep. Pep doesn't do that. It's not something that happens. And so I don't care how weak or how a Rodri-less City occur in that moment. That just doesn't happen to Pep. It's the first time that he has conceded 5 goals and lost by a 4-goal margin in his career. That's significant. It's the definition of an outlier. So we should talk about that. We should talk about what that means. And I think as far as Arsenal go, when you sit there and have, I don't have the numbers, but for me, we didn't have a problem accessing the center of the pitch in that match. And this whole City performance to me, it was a game of out of possession pressing. And I really felt in the lead up to this game, I said, the high intensity press, look out for it. I think that will be the story of the match. And to me, that was the story of the match in terms of how we were able to exert our control. I'm sure we'll go into the nerdy details of all of it. But if I'm trying to bottle my feelings to all of this, all I can see are rocket ship rising type of feelings. Like I feel this really is a result to set your season alight. We've felt asleep. I have felt asleep. I feel like the fans have felt asleep because there's this loss between people expecting us to do really well and us not living to that expectations, with some in our control and then some out of our control. But regardless, the outcome has left a sense of apathy for a lot of people. And I sit there and I say, dear God, like this is a result to wake people up. And people want to joke about what the Dubai trip gave to the team last year. It doesn't have to be a trip to Dubai. It can be a result like this. This is the type of thing that we've seen in the past, not just in terms of title challengers, but in terms of any team looking to go on a run and bookmark a period of poor form to a period of good form. It's off the back of a huge win against rivals. And yeah, mate, there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about as far as benefits go. And I just want to end on this. The way Arsenal, for me, this is the culmination of us learning how to play without Bukayo Saka. And for as much as I never want to see that again in my life, I think it is a huge period of growth that this team has learned to do that and not be reliant on him. And I don't think that's being talked about quite enough, in the media and as far as our own fans are concerned, because we learned to do that. And then you add Saka, so it's no longer a reliance. It's no longer our attacking identity is just let me get the ball to him and hope. That really makes me think that the ceiling of this team is a lot higher than originally I would put. And by the way, that's bigger than any transfer we could have made in this window would have made me feel.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and they didn't have Phil Foden, to be fair. But no, I think the fact that we didn't do it without Bukayo Saka, was massive. Look, I think the fact that it had to take us beating the champions 5-1 and the greatest manager of all time to feel like our season's got going tells you where we are. It does, and it's important to step back sometimes and just go, this is how far we've come under Mikel Arteta. If you told us on that day, whether it was when the Rodri goal goes in and they beat us 2-1 at the Emirates on New Year's Day 2022, or you go back to that result, against them at the Etihad, I think it was the 5-0 where we had blimmin' Rob Holding and Cedric Suarez playing, and you go back to those days. This is for me, this felt like vengeance for those days, and the fact that it came, I think there's almost two ways this season could have got going. And hopefully this is the thing that catapults it. It's by a string of wins, which I don't feel like we're on for this season for some reason, for whatever reason, with the disruption and the injuries, whatever, or it's a statement win. And that was absolutely a statement win. Again, it had to be a 5-1 against the champions of the greatest manager of all time, but we did it. And that is how good this team is. That is how capable we are. Rohan, there's so much fun, and George kind of touched on it there. We'll come on to the sort of the nerdy details, and we'll come on to how we actually achieved it in a second. But there is a bit of a rivalry growing, and there is this kind of the stay humble narrative, and Gabriel going in and needling Haaland, and the thing that the celebration that Miles did, and the Michael Oliver stuff in the reverse fixture, and the last minute winners, whatever. It does really feel like the Arsenal-Man City thing, however long it lasts, because we don't know how long Pep's going to be here. We don't know if this is the beginning of the end for City. Who knows? And only time will tell. But I have to say, I love that. And there was a quote that Arteta had in the post-match presser, which I think was really interesting, where they basically asked him, what do you think about the Miles thing? And he didn't really answer. He just sort of said, well, we have to focus on ourselves, but the players know what I think. And that to me is translation. I love it. I absolutely love it. And this firstly adds to the spectacle, and this adds to the the quality and the product, I think, of the Premier League. The fact that you have these sorts of rivalries in the modern day, and the things that we all call for. I think it can go too far. But secondarily, and potentially more importantly, I think it gives us a competitive advantage. I really do, leaning into this stuff, because we are bigger than them now. We're more physically capable of them, especially in the centre of the park, than them now. So leaning into this, we're not going to be bullied. We're not the Arsenal of old. You come here and you expect to fight. I love it. And when Miles did that, that is one of the most iconic moments of the Emirates era for me. That is just a young player coming out and doing that. So honestly, the longer it goes on, the better for me, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure for the neutral, it's something that people wanted to see. I mean, when we look back at, title clashes over the years of two teams going at each other, you're looking at Liverpool and Man City, Klopp versus Pep, but it never felt like there was any sort of malice in that rivalry. It felt very friendly, and it felt very, very just nice. Like, obviously, the games are really good, because I always think in boxing, styles make fights, and you get different styles bring the best type of battles that you get, and it's the same with football as well. And that's why people really love those Liverpool-Manchester City clashes. And Arsenal-Man City is a little bit different, because you've got two teams with obviously different... we've spoke about it many times in terms of the differences between Arteta and Pep, but ultimately the game model and some of the intentions, they're very similar. So you're never going to get that sort of frantic type of game that you saw with Jurgen Klopp. But what you do get with this fixture now is that edge outside of football. And that is something that I think the game has been lacking. And we go all the way back to the Man United and Arsenal rivalries, and it's not like that, obviously, but it's something that is what fans have missed, and certainly what I've missed. And I love it. I love the pettiness, because it's kind of like with Gabriel. He spoke about the Haaland situation after the Etihad. He said, "We'll wait for them at our house," and then you back your talk, and it's just brilliant. And I think on the game though, and going outside of the, the classic passion merchant, like buzzing, gassed about it, etc. But I always look back at that 22-23 4-1 defeat at Manchester City as a watershed moment in the context of facing Pep. That game was brutal for us. And how many times have we played Pep Guardiola over the years in which we wanted the game to end quickly because we can't stand watching any more of it? And fast forward now, that's how Manchester City fans would have felt in that game on Sunday. And it's crazy when you look at the journey and what's happened. And I just think that 22-23 game, we had to go through a lot of pain in that fixture. But what we've done since there is we've reacted, we've used it as a way of motivation. And since then, we're unbeaten against Pep. 3 out of 5 wins, 2 draws. And bearing in mind, at the Etihad earlier this season, we were seconds away from winning that game as well. We have their number. We have their number. And who would have thought that when Mikel came to the club? And obviously we'll get into the finer details. But I think you have to sit back and obviously, we've been disappointed that we've not been able to get over the line so far. But when we're looking at key moments in Mikel Arteta's tenure and how we've approached these big games and the sustainability of us in how we're playing now in those big games relative to what we were doing before, it speaks volumes. And I'm just so happy for it. And I think that, we did the TCP live on it before, and how we ranked all of Mikel Arteta's biggest games, and we had that game as our top because of what it's done. And it's fantastic. And obviously the rivalry that is brewing now, it's just adding to the spice because we know Manchester City, they will come back, they will get better, and their intentions will be quite clear in this window as well. Yes, we can argue it's some of the deals we may not be particularly worried about, but they are showing their intentions, they're going to go again, and I think this is really good for the Premier League. Yeah.
And they had new signings in that squad. It's not as I think this idea that we faced them in their worst period. They've had a great start to 2025, and we'll come on to as you say the tactical side in a second. But George, just quickly to close up on this, I think this suits us, and I think that's what the most exciting part for me is. If you want to come to our house, and this is not Arsenal. This has not been Arsenal for a long time. I think there's been a point maybe sort of from 2023 onwards where we've had that physicality. But where it's that thing of we're playing with you. That felt new. That I'm playing with a team of that quality like Man City, where Man City have been able to do that before. We've been able, I felt, to match teams physically, to maybe go over them physically and maybe even beat them. But to toy with them, that felt new to me. And to play with them and laugh at them almost in that way of sort of we know we're so much better than you today. And play, to play, the music at the end, that sort of stuff. That felt new to me. And that to me, if this is the new Arsenal and the way we are, I'm all for it because I think we, and when we come to the tactics, we'll find it physically can do that.
It really felt like a watershed moment where you finally beat up the older cousin that has tormented you at every single family event. And, it may have been the case, you're growing yourself throughout the years. So you feel kind of confident in your abilities. But then every time you go to a family event, you remember that older cousin picking on you, and he's still there, the bugger. And then when it finally goes, you explode, and you're 16, 17, 18, he can no longer bully you, and you're going to end up bullying him and match him, and then there's a respect drawn. Now, I think at the core of it, there is a respect, and I wanted to end on that because for as much as we say that there was a Liverpool City rivalry, I'm here to just ask the questions, how much of a rivalry it was.
Yeah.
And honestly...
6-1, that's how much of a rivalry it was.
Well, and... For me, I don't remember a true rivalry without animosity. In fact, if you really are to go back, you look at Real Madrid, Barcelona, you look at across different leagues, you look at the AC Milan, Juventus rivalry in the past in the 90s. You look at football's greatest rivalries, count how many of them were fun, respectful, and also look at the records, because I hate to do this, and people are going to take this as a dig on Liverpool, but factually, I don't consider one win out of 5 rivalry. I don't consider, and I think it bore out in the media in terms of how they treated each other. And I do feel, although this is premature because Arsenal haven't won anything, so to be fair, by my own logic, this may not be accurate, but I do feel that Pep sees the writing on the wall, and I think he sees the challenge a little bit more worrisome than he did the Liverpool one. And he's always seen that. And I think that's why there is a bit of animosity. I mean, for me, you don't care And you show that by not engaging in some of this little stuff like Holland and what their players did as a team. And it wasn't just the new signings or the youth. It was experienced pros that have been there, won it, and did it, losing their heads after having been off the back of a 3-peat, 4-peat. To me, that says a lot more about how people view you than anything, right? And so I can't buy this idea that they don't care or Pep doesn't care or they're not worried. And to me, that says it all. That's the biggest praise that I can glean from it. And then moving on as far as what Arsenal can do, I just think it's super important that this young team believes their hype. I felt that we've got to a point in which we've been coached up and we've done the small things right. We've done everything in the transfer market well. We've got to a point that this team is now, 24 mean age and change? Last 2 years, you could say, okay, 23, almost 22 and a half. So they were a young team, overachieving to the point of challenging. And now it got to a point of, okay, we're all entering pre-prime. It's time to win. It's time to grow up, in a sense, not be told, oh my gosh, you're a young boy that's done so well. Stop with the patronizing. You're a man now that's taking your food. And I think we're in the process of trying to collect that chain. And I've seen a lot of players grow up in this team throughout this season. I look at William Saliba. I look at Bukayo Saka, chief among them, getting the chain as the best player in the world, not just for Arsenal. Making that conversation actually happen was significant to me in terms of taking the next step. And I think, again, to do it without a talisman like that and make it a 5-1 is what makes this game so special, because we found other heroes within this team that have finally stepped up for me in quite a bit of ways. And, I'm sure we'll have an entire section on Declan Rice, but mate, I think we've faced 16 matches with the top 6 with Declan Rice, and he has yet to lose with Arsenal.
Yeah.
I'm just going to repeat that stat for people that are listening. Declan Rice, having joined Arsenal, we have faced the top 6 16 times and are undefeated.
17 times, George. 17.
Sorry, I stand corrected because we won. So 17. It's phenomenal. It is phenomenal. And then and you're seeing the glimpses, by the way, of an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old now taking their spot within the team. And again, this is not a case of, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. They are actually sat there and saying, no, I'm taking that spot, Mikel. Yeah. And so that transition is happening throughout the squad. It's not even just an age thing. And I think that's been my favorite part of this match. It's almost the conclusion to that journey.
Yeah. Arsenal unbeaten in 17 games against the big 6 sides in the Premier League. I think maybe just to carry on one of the classic George analogies, I think we've been in that process of growing up and becoming the 17, 18-year-old, beating your uncle, whatever you want to say. But as I said, I think this is the first time that you've come back to Christmas and you're still big. And you beat them again, and you start and you start enjoying it, and this is the exciting part. And actually, just want to read out a quote from Arteta. He said on where this win ranks during his time as manager, he said, "I don't know. We just enjoy the day, but for the players to believe that we can compete against anybody on our day, and we play at that level individually and collectively, we compete at that level. I think it's going to be very helpful for the future." And I think, again, just to kind of emphasize this point before we move on, that was a day where, those numbers about the big 6 games, a lot of them have, when we beat City at the Emirates last season, it was 1-0. And, when we've edged Chelsea, or we've just got past Liverpool, or, maybe have a good result, but, it doesn't feel like we quite played with them. We played with them. And I think that's a really important moment on that Mikel quote for the players to believe themselves. And as you say, in this sort of maturation period. Before I hand over to you, tactics nerds, I just want to say a couple of things that I think we did really well. I think one of the things that I think maybe will get missed about this game is it wasn't just a day where, the youth players shine. Obviously, we're going to talk about Declan, etc., etc. It was a day where Mikel had Pep's number. Absolutely had Pep's number. First thing, I said this on Instant Reaction, but I think it bears repeating. One of the things that I think City do really well is those rotations out wide. When their wingers drop in, they do that touch and they run in behind, or they combine inside, whatever it might be. Our fullbacks were magnificent at stopping them doing that, to the point where it was a little bit dangerous, the spaces we were doing. And that's a theme of this game, the bravery we had in terms of our setup to step in early and stop them dropping in wide and leaving that space in behind for them to possibly go into, but they had nothing for us. I thought Ødegaard, I think, George, maybe we disagree. I thought Ødegaard had a really important game in terms of the influence he had in the first third, dropping in, creating options, getting us up the pitch. I thought his usage was absolutely lovely. Love the switch of Martinelli more inside with Kai more wide on the right-hand side as a more of a reference that side. I think he's a more reliable reference out there and can progress us up there. I love that. And the final thing to say, which Declan Rice spoke about in his post-match press, was a presser was about the press itself. How early we were, how brave we were, how high our centre midfields were to say, if you try that pass inside, we're going to jump on you. We've never done that before against Pep, and I think the byword today, on Sunday, was bravery, and I absolutely love that in the setup. But I'll come to you, Rohan, first. What did you see from a sort of tactical perspective?
I saw quite a lot in this game, and I might go on for a fair bit here, but I really want to focus on the things that we did so well in this game. And again, every time we play Man City, Pep has a different idea. And every time he has a different idea, since that 22-23 season, we have reacted, and we react so quickly, and it came in the press. Now, Arsenal, I tweeted it out at Baseline, right? Arsenal are the most flexible, adaptable, and just generally the best pressing team out there in the world. They have been for a number of years now. That is our staple. And I just find it incredible how quickly we're able to adapt to what teams are doing, especially this Pep Guardiola team. Now, if you look at the goal that we scored with Ødegaard in the first couple of minutes, right, and you look at our pressing structure there, it's actually not what we wanted to do. Well, it's not what we did throughout the entire game after that, because we recognised that if we pressed in that same way, it could have caused us issues. And what I mean by that is we press in our usual way of Ødegaard initially starting on the central midfielder and then jumping to the left centre-back. And that is the trigger, And we did that in that moment in which Ødegaard scores the goal. And by the way, I think timing is so crucial in the press, and it doesn't get spoken about enough. And it's about understanding the triggers. Now, when John Stones plays that pass into Akanji, that is when we increase the pressure, because that pass puts Akanji in a very difficult situation in which the way Trossard's pressing from out to in, and he's attacking the strong foot of Akanji, he can't open his body up, which means that he's either forced to play a pass inside with his right foot or he's forced to use his left foot. And because it happens so quickly and Trossard increases the intensity just like that, it makes him have to make a really quick decision, and then Declan Rice is there to pounce, and then we scored that goal brilliantly. But what Pep did in this game is that he used Ortega as, and they do tend to do this every single time they play us now, is that Ortega was the central centre-back, and the two centre-backs split him. And the key here was that they pushed Núñez really high. They pushed him right on our last line, and they forced Foden to come inside. They had Marmoush, Haaland, and then on the other side, they had Savio, who was pinning Timber. So they pushed 5 players across the last line, which meant that we had to keep 5 back because we can't give them an advantage there, especially with how good they are in terms of their ability to go over the top and in transition. And by the way, I think Edison's absence was a massive miss for them in terms of the range in which he gets with his long kicks and the accuracy. But we had to keep 5 back there. So then it was a case of, okay, what do we do with our other 5? Rice, Ødegaard, Havertz, Trossard and Martinelli. What do we do with them? Now, the way City were building up, like I said, Ortega central centre-back, the 2 centre-backs split, and the 2 in midfield of Kovacic and Silva. If Arsenal pressed their normal way of Ødegaard starting on Kovacic and then pressing to the centre-back, which is what we tried to do initially, then Declan Rice is again in that situation where he's standing between the 2 in the pivot, but City are quite clever in how they were rotating and how they were swapping the 2. So we recognised Declan Rice couldn't do that job on his own, so we had to tweak it. And the tweak was Ødegaard and Rice both were man-marking Kovacic and Silva, but Ødegaard was not pressing too far in to Kovacic, and likewise Rice wasn't pressing too far in to Silva, so that they give themselves a bit of a gap in the event of City going long. And the key here was because Núñez is pushed really high, and like I said, we've got 5 to match their 5, and Miles Lewis-Skelly is pinned against Núñez. Trossard was the guy who was joining the front line with Havertz to press and to force Ortega to make a decision, and Havertz was doing what Ødegaard was doing. And then when you have Ødegaard and Rice as those 2 on the pivot, when they went long, which we did not want them to do that quickly because City are very good in transition. But when they did go long, Ødegaard and Rice were in positions to compete for the second ball, and we didn't empty the midfield. Whereas if Ødegaard was pressing in his normal way, where he's jumping to the centre-back, and then Rice can't get onto that other pivot player Thomas Partey would then have to jump forward. But if Partey jumps forward, then we've emptied the midfield. And that is exactly what City wanted us to do. But we didn't fall for their bait. Every time they went long, we were in a position where we could squeeze the space and we could collect the second ball. And we did it time and time again in this game. And it's different to the way that we pressed against Aston Villa, where Martinelli joined the front line. It's different to the game against Wolves when we went down to 10 men, where Havertz was forcing Jose Sarr to go to the opposite side because we didn't want Cunha and Ait-Nouri to have a lot of influence in the game. We make these changes time and time again, and it works so well. And the other thing that I mentioned many times, and I did a whole piece on it, was there are certain triggers that City do that is the signal for us is to not fall for that bait. When Bernardo Silva joins the back line, that is encouraging Rice, come to me, press. But then that is what they want you to do. And then Rice is out of position and they could attack that space. Every time their midfielder, either Kovacic or Silva, dropped into the back line, we didn't fall for that bait. And then we suffered a bit. And Arteta mentioned it. He mentioned it in his press conference where he said, City do certain things in which you have to time it well. You have to understand the situation. If you don't, they'll get into your box just like that. And then you have to defend a very dangerous situations. So I think we made really good tweaks there.
Really well laid out, especially around the how we won the second balls in the midfield. I think, you have to suffer against City. Yeah. There's going to be times where you say, we're not going to take that bait. They're going to step back. They're going to have the ball for a bit. That's okay. Yeah. We have to live with that a little bit. I think we dealt with that suffering well. George, anything to add on, Mr. Pressing?
Yeah, a little bit. Just so I think also what was really important was the defense as far as what City were trying to do, which was a quick switch out to Miles Lewis-Skelly. And so when you're talking about like Kovacic and Bernardo Silva dropping into the back line, one of the biggest things was to coax the center of the pitch out, but to draw Miles Lewis-Skelly to fill the holes that hopefully Rice would have gone with to Bernardo Silva and Kovacic. And they kept trying the switch out to catch that distance out. And they weren't doing a great job of it. I mean, actually, no, Arsenal just were doing a great job about not falling for the bait. And so really there wasn't that big distance to go. But the plan was, let me draw Rice out of that midfield. And it forces Miles Lewis-Skelly to invert a little bit more next into Thomas Partey. And by doing that, I will keep kind of the width in terms of Nunez, but also Savio out wide, hopefully for a quick switch that we can then exploit and then find somebody on the back post, typically Marmoush. And that was this whole idea. And you just saw countless long balls out to the left back that we dealt with brilliantly, but to me were the result of not falling for a bait, but City trying to keep to their plan. And one of the biggest things that I noticed was a huge bravery in Mikel that wasn't the case in past matches with City about how man-to-man we really went. And the amount of times that I saw Saliba on his own as a center back and us committing people forward whilst in possession was incredible to me. That reminded me back. Do you guys remember when we were first facing Pep? He was really this brazen, but then we hit the 4-1. And I really feel that Mikel made people sit back ever since then, and we became a lot more focused on transition control. It was almost a case of trying to understand and try to reevaluate that balance in terms of how many men do I commit and how many do I not. And for the first time, I saw bravery in which he let it go. Not only did we maintain our fundamentals in terms of the 1v1 press, that Rohan so brilliantly laid out, but I felt in possession. We allowed people to go forward. Saliba stayed back. Gabriel stepped up. And for the first time, we did this against City. I've seen this done against other opposition this year, but I haven't seen it against City and an opposition like that before. And so what it ended up happening was when you had that kind of Gabriel pushing up in addition to it, Miles Lewis-Skelly didn't feel that he needed to be there. He operated much more as a left central midfielder, which is how that goal comes about in general. And I think the fun thing that I will just end on is Calafiori comes in and I see the same things. I see the exact same things in the same positions as far as Calafiori getting that goal ruled off of Wolves from a run, by the way. He could have had similar with City, by the way. He was that high as well. And, this idea of using a left back in a nominal box-to-box role because we feel comfortable with Gabriel filling the spot in the box midfield from deep and just leaving Saliba is a bravery that I like to see. I hope we see continue. And I think the biggest thing is that Mikel Arteta will see the scoreline and this working and not be as conservative in the future is my hope. And everything worked to plan with those changes.
Do you know what it is as well? It's kind of like it's, and I want to go quickly on the timing and the moment in which Havertz misses that gilt edge opportunity, right? It's the perfect example of when when to go and when not to go. And if you look at that first pass that goes to Ortega, it's not a great ball to begin with. And then obviously you look at Kovacic, he's back to goal, and that is the trigger to go harder. And Declan Rice is so good at this, where he's not going full on in immediately, because if he does, then Ortega knows, right, I just need to go long because I've got no simple routes here in terms of going short. But Declan Rice, he waits. And then the moment he plays that ball, that's it. And there is nobody in world football who is as good as Declan Rice at that. And it's just all about timing. I think, we talk a lot about the press on this pod, and maybe it can become boring, but I think that is our staple. And we should talk about it because it's an art. It's an art in the way that we do it. And there's a reason why Arteta wanted, I can't remember what his name was, the former assistant manager at Liverpool, was it?
Pep Linders.
Pep Linders,
yeah, Pep Linders, and why the players talk about it a lot as well.
Mentioned it again. His post-match, Declan Rice. Yeah, and I think it also just to maybe close off this section, I think it facilitates the rotations that you see. Like when people can operate in those different spaces, the amount of rotation I was seeing on Sunday, was extraordinary. And I think really what stands out to me, if you go back and watch the build up to that Ethan Nwaneri goal, that final goal, just go and look at where the players are. They're all over the place. Punching into an area, pulling out, dropping out, creating an angle, putting it in, jumping in. It's so good. And they all know exactly where they need to stand. It's great stuff. We mentioned him a number of times. I mean, we could go anywhere here in terms of we could probably go on every single player. But I'll start with Declan Rice, who I thought was extraordinary yesterday. Declan Rice has created more big chances than any other player in the Premier League in 2025. Declan Rice with 6. This is according to Squawka. Kevin De Bruyne with 4. Bruno Guimaraes with 4. Any ideas who's fourth or joint fourth or joint second? Sorry. Another Arsenal player.
Saka.
Another Arsenal player in 2025.
Oh, in 2025.
Leandro Trossard.
Yeah.
Declan Rice with 6, Kevin De Bruyne with 4, and joint with him is Leandro Trossard on 4. It was an unbelievable performance from Rice yesterday. Again, I think he's been playing himself into form. George, I think it can just, yes, it's the instruction and the stuff we were just referring to, but sometimes it can come down to that physical capacity. And this is really where I felt we edged past Man City yesterday. He can just run more than you. Yeah. And sometimes that is enough to underpin an entire performance. And he can get to a ball quicker than you. He can dominate zones better than you. He can get in front of you quicker. He is a physical freak. And this is something we see with Mikel, and we've spoken about before in terms of, Partey's legs or Ben White's running or, Jurrien Timber, how sturdy he is. Or, you could look at any player and look at maybe how, Calafiori, physically they're slightly freakish. But Rice really is a freak. It really is crazy. And then you see his passing range. And obviously the pass for the Nwaneri goal is probably the standout. But I just thought he was extraordinary again yesterday. And it's another big game where Declan Rice stands up, is counted, comes out after, talks, and you feel like he is the guy.
We're going to have some uncomfortable conversations as far as identity goes in the next 2 years, in my opinion. And a lot of it comes from Declan. And, I think understanding that player and what that player gives you is going to be key to what your projections might be for the Arsenal team, fundamentally. Every time that I have an example of Arsenal doing really well against a top-level opposition, we're going to talk individual moments. It could be in attack, could be in defense, could be in midfield. But when you talk about the elite of the elite and the elite of the elite beating each other, I'm sorry, that comes down to quality. Comes down to pure quality. And it's why, to me, Arsenal are one of the best coached teams in the world. So on our day, we will give any team a go. You want to dominate, though? You want to belittle? And you want to go that extra step in terms of being the big brother? You need quality to do it. You need Robin Ribery. You need, Lionel Messi. You need Cristiano Ronaldo, and you need Declan Rice. As far as what he can do in the press, you made kind of a point about him being a freak. It is this ability to close lines. I call it the accordion. So the biggest thing in modern football is being able to, A, spread your lines out to go man to man, and then quickly reduce those lines in the period of a transition. So your ability to get big and small. an accordion. And a team's ability to do that in the modern game is what's going to define success for me. And he is the epitome of that. So he can run 15, 20 yards to commit to Kovacic up the pitch and then win the second ball, turn around, and then play a long switch out to the right-hand side and set off Ethan. Like, that's the type of player you're talking about.
Again and again and again and again.
Exactly.
And that's the key part.
And to continue to have the stamina to repeat those actions and to repeat the accordion-like quality of making up 20, 30 yards and going again, or even the simple fact of after losing that ball to Ethan Nwaneri, there's going to be a breakaway down the right because Ethan miscontrols it. I don't doubt Declan's going to run the other 15, 35 yards to make up the 1v1 in transition. And it's a cheat code, mate. It's a cheat code. And unfortunately, I'll end on this. My one thing is when I talk physicality, and because I get labeled as a PNP merchant fundamentally, but it comes down to this really simple point. Okay, we have some great tactics. We've talked a lot on this podcast about how the team has done well in the press, right? We've talked about that, but for me, individual moments and the ability to separate between the elite comes down to physical advantage. Always will, in my opinion, and I think that's going to bear more true as we continue in modern football going forward, because every team is going to have this idea of positional football down, and it's going to come down to this simple idea: can your ball carriers not just ball carry, but engage, attack space, and worry? Can they do that? Can they draw out these positional drilled defenses that know what time to go into the block and how many people to get into a zone? Everybody's got that. Wolves, Bromley from League 2 will be grown up in terms of understanding positional play and all the zones on the pitch in zone 14. That's the stage we're at right now in the world. And so when everybody has that, how do you create separation? It's going to be through specifically ball carrying players that can attack space, engage space, and our understanding of how to make up that difference physically. It's not just a technical or a mental thing. They need to have the physical capacity to. And you know what, mate? You can transition that to Miles Lewis-Skelly. You can transition that to all the top players, by the way, in terms of Ethan Nwaneri, his ability to make up that run 35 yards and then have the power to execute that finish 30 yards out or 25 yards out with a simple step, with a short back. Again, it comes down to these physical differences. Yeah. And I think that's what makes Declan Rice so special. You can't not talk about it.
Rohan, I think I've recorded with you long enough to know which quote you're about to reference. In the book Pep City, The Making of a Super Team by Lou Martin and Paul Ballas, Arteta lays out why fullbacks are of such vital importance in the Premier League. For City or any top side, it's obviously great to have players who will bring you control of the ball, control of matches, but in the Premier League, it's vital to have guys who will offer massive amounts of intensity and athletic aggression in key 1v1 moments. If you don't have that, then for however much you construct an intricate interior play, the big beast of the Premier League will eventually press you and rob the ball from you. How many times have we rinsed that quote?
That's just Declan Rice, isn't it? It's
Declan Rice. He said that in before, pre working for Pep. This is something that's just in him. And I think George is absolutely spot on with that. I suppose maybe just to transition away from that conversation, because I think that's kind of has said maybe enough. I personally, Rohan, I would love to see Declan deeper, but there's a part of me going, is that me as a fan wanting people to acknowledge Declan Rice's passing range? Is that me as a fan wanting to win arguments, saying, well, I've always wanted him deeper, and look how good he is and influential, and look how he can play passes through the lines, and look how he switches it out? I actually am approaching a point where I'm going, is it that I want him deeper, or is it that I want him with more influence on the game? And if I'm seeing his big chances created numbers, if I'm seeing his running numbers, if I'm seeing how he's getting all over the pitch, if I'm seeing how he's dictating and deciding these massive games by his performances, am I not getting what I want? So forget 6, forget 8. Yes, okay, maybe he can't quite receive in the block in the way we want a number 8 to, but look at Ethan Nwaneri, look at the other performances. We're not talking about him. We're talking about Declan Rice and what he can do. And I think the more influence Declan Rice can have on a game, the better. And maybe it's from higher.
It's a case of there are two roles I look at Declan Rice as a way of maximising his potential. And it's as an out-and-out number 6, or it's as a pivot player on the left-hand side, in which he's underneath possession a lot, in which he's able to dictate the game, but then he's also given that license to attack the box. The problems that I've had with Declan Rice playing as a number 8 in a lot of games this season is that we have him between the lines in a block, and we aren't giving him that freedom. And that happened a lot. Yeah, it happened a lot earlier in the season, because Declan Rice, he will never be a guy who's going to be able to turn on the half turn in confined spaces inside the block. And he's also mentioned this in The Athletic. He said that he likes playing as a number 8 when the game opens up. Yeah, when the game opens up and there's a lot of space, that is where he likes to play. And I actually think that recently the way that we've used Declan Rice as our left-sided midfielder has benefited him, because he's been able to have a lot of influence on the ball, because he's more underneath possession. It's not a case of we've just stuck him high and he's staying there, because that limits him massively. But also what you're getting is you're still getting that box crashing quality that he gives you. And that's where I do understand why people like Declan Rice in that role. And I like him in that role as well. When we're looking at Zubimendi, right, who looks very likely to come, you've got a pivot of Zubimendi and Declan Rice, and you're allowing Declan Rice to stay underneath possession a lot, but also not limiting what he can do in the box. You've got a world-class player there. But when you have someone in the way that we used early on in this season, and also last season as well at times, in which you push him inside the block, he has about 20 or 30 touches in the game. That is not a player who is going to be maximised. But in terms of Declan Rice as a player, I mean, all I can say is when the temperature rises, Declan Rice elevates his game every single time. And George mentioned the numbers in terms of his performances in the Big Six since he's came. And he's also said it, like post-match yesterday, he said, this is why Arsenal bought me, in the big games. Yes, last season, right? Arsenal didn't win the league, and it's a bit of an anomaly because our Big Six record was incredible. I don't think it's ever happened in which a team's Big Six record was as good as what it was as Arsenal's and still not win the league. But when you look at the trend over the entirety of the Premier League, if you are the best against the Big Six by a comfortable margin, you will win the Premier League. We didn't do that, but that is not to say that Declan Rice's influence shouldn't be forgotten, because this is why we bought him. If you want to win the titles, it is your record against the Big Six. If we keep doing what we are doing in the Big Six, 37 points out of 51 since the start of last season, Arsenal will win league titles. They absolutely will. And Declan Rice, in those games, you could go through 80 to 90% of those games and he could be a worthy man of the match performer in any of them. That's how good he is. And when you're looking at £100 million talents over the last few years that have been bought, Declan Rice is value for money. He is. Just because he's a midfielder, a defensive midfielder, doesn't mean that 100 million is an overpay. For what Arsenal needed, he absolutely was a steal. Absolutely a steal.
Really quickly, I think we need to define midfielders in the modern game and move away from 8, 10, 6, because a lot of teams operate in this box midfield. I've said a lot, and maybe we can have like a tactical breakdown one of these days in terms of me visualizing it for people for what to see. But there will be people that are behind the ball and ahead of the ball, quite simply. And you're always going to have a collection. There's going to be pods. Okay, and things are going to alternate, but there's always going to be a primarily behind the ball player and a primarily ahead of the ball player. Players will do both jobs, but there's going to be 2 players at the base of a box midfield and 2 players at the top of a box midfield, and you can have a diamond, you can have it rotate in different ways, but conceptually, if you want to understand, what is his role, it's going to be that. And I think part of the problem is that when you talk about 8, Arteta uses our left central 8 as one of the most advanced midfielders in his middle 3 or his box midfield. Like, it's a box crashing midfielder that is built high, asked to stay high, and to exploit the last line with runs. We've seen it with Granit Xhaka. We've seen it now. We've seen it with the idea of why Mourinho was bought. It's going to be a case. And I think for me, my one thing is I don't want to put Declan Rice in those zones because can he do it? Yes, but that's because he's brilliant and he's world class. That's not how you maximize Declan for me. And so I think moving forward, this idea of a double pivot, we've always been a double pivot team, but we haven't been a traditional double pivot team. And I think that's the idea moving forward. If we're looking at Zubimendi and Rice and long term about how to fit it, Our structure won't change. The numbers, you'll still see 3-2, but it'll be a much more traditional double pivot in which the midfielders operate in that too, as opposed to a fullback joining in. And that's if you admit that Zubimendi's a starter and you think that he's going to play. That's how I look at it. That's how I look where you've got two players behind the ball. Again, two in the box at the base of this box midfield, and then we're going to have two ahead. Now, the two ahead we can debate, and maybe this is a transition topic about where Martin Odegaard falls in terms of that. Like, if you commit more midfielders in the pivot as opposed to a fullback, that means, logically, that you have to ask a question about what that third midfielder is going to do in the box. And it's inevitably going to be high. It's not going to be in the middle third. And I don't know, maybe we can have a discussion about Martin Odegaard. I know me and you, Alex, like disagree, but I think as far as how well he did in this match, but I think long term, if you're talking about philosophy in terms of the kind of the team, where do you see that? That for me is a question, because I felt like a lot of his final third actions this game, to bring it back to this specific game, for me, frustrated. His pace of pass in the final third for me was really inconsistent. I felt like there was a lot of times that attacks fell down with his passing in the final third, whereas I feel when he's in the first phase or in build-up or in the second phase even, Martin Odegaard is one of the most reliable passing midfielders I can see in the world in those pockets. But as soon as, for me, he enters kind of the final third, there is a consistent ability for him to overhit passes, sometimes put it off to kind of the weak foot of the attacker. There's a lot of times yesterday for me when, he's giving the ball out to Martinelli or another release of an attacker, and it's wide of his stride. And he does this quite a bit for me. And I think, this is just my opinion. I feel I need to see an evolution there if I'm going to see him be the number 10. And when kind of Mikel is talking about goals, I actually don't even think it's necessarily output. He needs to find clinical efficiency in zone 14, in my opinion. That can be through a pass, through setting up a pass, or through goals itself. But that, for me, is something that we need to see from Odegaard if he's going to evolve with the idea of a deep pivot.
I think let's pause the Odegaard conversation there, just because there's probably a longer conversation to be had about him. I mean, Jordan Davies, Mikel Arteta speaking to Spanish media in Girona about Martin Odegaard. He used to play very far from the area. I've tried to bring him closer. My challenge is that he loves it. The day he does that, we will see 15 goals in the Premier League. And I think there's a conversation. I think it's been quite tactic heavy so far, so I'm just cautious of having that conversation. I want to transition though to maybe certainly something we have to talk about. Just sort of thinking about in that conversation about Declan Rice there, in terms of what he's bringing. And I think looking through our recent arrivals, I'm looking at Calafiori and Marino and Raya, and the promotions of there he is, promotions of Wanyeri, Lewis Skelly, even Timber. There feels like there is a bit of maybe a shift away from the Fabio Vieiras and those types of guys, and not to pick on him, in terms of these guys who are incredibly mentally sturdy. And I think what I see with Declan Rice is that guy who can walk into the Champions League final, as we say, and deliver, and will deliver for you. And that is exactly what I see from these two young men that we have to talk about, which is defining what this new Arsenal is. And I think Declan Rice absolutely is part of that. But it's so exciting. 22nd of September, 2024, Erling Haaland to Miles Lewis-Skelly. Who the F are you? I think you know now, mate. Miles Lewis-Skelly's game by numbers versus Man City: 41 touches, 23 out of 25 passes completed, 7 out of 8 duels won, 5 possession won, 3 fouls won, 2 tackles, 2 clearances, 1 shot, 1 goal. And a quick stat on Ethan's side: only 2 players under the age of 18 have scored more than 2 goals for sides from Europe's top 5 leagues this season. Lamine Yamal with 10 and Ethan Wanyeri with 7. And Wanyeri has only played 689 minutes compared to Yamal's 2,324. We have, as we know, 2 absolute studs on our books, Rohan. And we've known that for a while. But I think what was so exciting yesterday, before we come to them as players and their profiles, was the way they stepped up. The lack of fear, the lack of self-criticisms, just the confidence, I guess, they showed. I was so impressed by both of their performances yesterday. I think Ethan as well, coming into that game cold, a game of that level, and being able to deliver that kind of performance, even in a cameo, and then obviously scoring his goal. obviously the way Miles celebrated is unbelievable. I'm just so pleased that this is what the new Arsenal looks like. This is how our academy looks like. This is the archetype, I hope, of what a young player at Arsenal coming through is. No fear, pure quality, gives us something different. Asks us difficult questions, by the way, about players like Marino and Calafiori and what's going to be different about the central midfield areas and do we need a winger? And whatever you think of those conversations, I'm so pleased that they are forcing us to have those conversations. We also, before I let you go, shouldn't understate this isn't normal.
No, it's not the norm.
We've said this before. This isn't another nice couple of players off the production line. These are guys competing with Yamal in terms of numbers. These are guys putting up the best dual numbers in the Premier League since they came into the team. These are, in the very possible best way, freaks, and we are very lucky to have them.
I think, we've always said on this podcast, we've always been pushing Miles and Ethan right there and saying they're ready. And we know how good they are. We know what they are as a player, their qualities. So I don't really want to focus on that. What I want to focus on is the fact that when was the last time in Arsenal's history in which we played the champions of England, £200 million hairline talents spawned, 17, 18 years of age, have dunked on the champions of England's head in a 5-1 win? When
and played with them.
Played with them.
They played with it. It wasn't even it didn't feel hard for them.
It's actually that's one of the first things I tweeted after yesterday was I've never remembered such a situation. And with Miles, right? Miles, I don't know if you saw the interview with Ian Wright post-match Spurs, I think it was, where he asked Miles, are you scared? Are you worried?
I posted it.
Oh, did you? Yeah. He was he was asking about, are you afraid? He's like, no, I want to be the best. I want to play against the best players. And he's just unfazed by the scenario. And me and George did a TCP live, and we spoke about whether it's Calafiori or Miles. And, it's kind of like 50-50 amongst the fan base of who they would have went for in this game. And I went for Miles. And the reason why I went for Miles is the fact that he's earned that. He earned that game to start from the get-go. I don't know about you, but I also really like storylines. Obviously, what happened at Wolves and the red card, the scandalous decision that happened there. And then obviously you have what happened at the Etihad with Miles and what you just mentioned with Haaland. That storyline was just perfect for this game. And he deserved that opportunity, and the maturity that he plays with. Like I said, we know how good he is as a footballer, but I want to really focus on the awareness and how he smells danger. How many goals has he saved from the back post? Literally just being alert. And that was Erling Haaland at one stage. Erling Haaland is a master at the back post of pouncing.
Bodied him, mate.
He bodied him. It's actually crazy.
Erling Haaland.
Yeah, Erling Haaland. And he did it with Bernardo Silva as well, where Raya managed to get a fingertip save off the Guardiola cross. He's just unbelievable. And Ethan Monieri as well. We spoke about it, didn't we? That trademark move, coming inside, shot towards the far corner. He has it every single time. There's so many examples there. So many examples for England as well in the youth academy as well. It's we are so blessed. So blessed.
Just quickly, the thing I referenced earlier as well, if you go and watch the build-up to the goal, there was a clip going around how many times he calls for it.
Yeah.
He wants that goal about 3 minutes before it happens.
And do you know what it is? It's
Give it to me.
And you could tell Declan Rice was itching to get that pass into him. And he said it was I wanted to get that pass to him. It was give me the ball, I'm going to switch it, and then bang. We are so blessed. And I said it at pre-season, I felt the squad building is going to have these two very much in mind. And it should do. Yeah. They've saved us so much money here.
George, there's a question mark about the market, which we'll come on to in our stream. And one of the things I want to put to you guys in the stream is about the emergence of these guys and what it may have done. And, I still don't think it makes it right that if we haven't signed anyone, if we haven't signed anyone. However, we have established and basically spent, in inverted commas, £200 million on the squad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was fighting in the trenches quite a bit this summer about how much I project these guys. And I just want to echo your guys' thoughts. This isn't normal, by the way. For as much as I am high on these specific players and how much I believed in their talents beforehand, to do what they have done and you start listing their exploits, right? We're talking starting has actually not just given opportunities, but now they're starting for Arsenal. Ethan alone is what, I think on 6 or 7 goals. Doesn't Cesc Fabregas only have 8 goals before he's like 17?
He's like 2 away from Rooney, or so. I'll get the number up.
He's like 2 away from Rooney, and even Michael Owen, right? He's only like 3 or 4 away from him.
Here we go. Ethan Nwaneri scored 3 goals in the Prem. Only 2 players in history have scored more before turning 18. Wayne Rooney with 7, Michael Owen with 5.
Yeah, there you go. So you're talking within 3 to 4 goals to beat the record, the youngest player to have done it. And by the way, man of the match, Champions League goal as well added to those exploits. Then you look at Miles, who I've always said, look, this isn't an I told you so moment, but it was one of those where people put him below Ethan because of what they had seen, and this is not the case. We are talking about equal level talents in their position, and they're both £100 million assets. Mate, I do subscribe to the idea it's massively changed Arsenal's plans, and more so than we think. I think they all planned on having opportunities this season, but they've excelled. Again, for me, I've said 500 minutes is what I expected. Then maybe next year we're talking about more. If somebody can double check while I'm talking, I think both have passed it at that point.
They're on like 800 minutes, I think, each or something.
And growing because they're so important. It's got to the point where that...
Ethan's on 647.
There you go. So they've already passed the metric.
Miles will be on more as well. So yeah. So they've already passed that 500-minute mark, I guess is the big point. But they're now exceeding. They're now demanding to start. They're going to start in the freaking semi-final against Newcastle. Who would be shocked that Miles is starting left back?
Not at all.
No one.
Miles is 1,173, by the way.
There you go. It's getting ridiculous, and it's to the point that they're first-team players, guys. Like, they are factually first-team players. Yeah. And look, I made the very bold claim. I don't think Arsenal need to buy another 8-10. Now, you want to talk about the Sverre Nightpan transfer and like a youth potentially? That's £10 million. Okay, that doesn't count. But I'm talking about a bona fide 8-10 for 60 to 70 million pounds. No, I don't agree. Arsenal need to spend to go and do it. We have 2 £100 million assets that each have slightly different skills that can play in advanced areas just as much as behind. And so I do think that it's changed the squad building. They're looking at things now. I do think Ethan and Miles were considerations in this transfer window, guys. It was a case of what are some priorities? What can we do? Arsenal truly can focus on forwards. They truly can focus on getting rid of Jorginho, Partey and replacing that, and not thinking about, do I need something else in the 8 position? Because for me, between the two of these guys, they are solving quite a bit of both right wing depth as well as 8-10 depth in the squad that people really need to have a look for. And I'll just end on this. Max Dowman. The reason I'm highlighting him is because Arsenal have freaking highlighted him already. That is a 15-year-old that is there, guys. I'm telling you, preseason, he will come in and he will be an opportunity. This is the same level of talent, if not better, than Ethan and Miles. And it's scary. I'm not. There's no hyperbole done here. It is probably the best talent in his age group in the world. Every single person wants him. And it matters, guys. Like when you have squad building kind of debates and we look at this stuff, when you have talents like this, they're exceptions. Yeah. I'm with people when they say you can't put that pressure on youth. But guys, it's not pressure when they sit there. They deserve and they earn it, as you said, Rohan. They have earned this. Give them the praise and give them a platform. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just insane. I think we'll come on to this more, obviously, on the transfer side of things. But I'm looking, we haven't lost a Premier League game since November. Yeah. And in the emergent, and I would be interested in the numbers for both Miles and Ethan in Saka's absence. And you have to admit that it will have affected something. Again, as I say, on balance, I don't think we should have done something. But I think it has to affect things. And also, when they're talking about new deals, we're aware that both Ethan and Miles are speaking to the club about new deals. Obviously, Max Dowman is in pictures with the first team at 10 years old, whatever it is. He has to be shown a pathway. I think unless Musiala's available and wants to come for a decent price, you have to stick with it, right? And so you have to understand with that. But look, I think let's end on this because it's slightly ending up in FFS mode. It's just credit to them, credit to the people around them, credit to the club for the way they've handled them. This is an incredible success story. And, not to take any credit away from you, George, George has been hyping up Miles and Ethan for as long as I can remember. I don't think even you would have predicted this. That's how well they've done. Not even you would have said that they would do this well. So that's how good they are. And yeah, it's unbelievable. Before we close, we have a slightly shorter one because because of the transfer time. I want to come to two more players before we close out. Actually, no, sorry, I'll come to one more, and then we'll do some questions, some quick fire questions. I want to come to David Raya. I was going to come to Kai Havertz, but I think that's time for another day. But I truly believe he's got. Do you know what I realised recently? He's got a similar problem to Saka. He's too consistent. I said this on Saturday Social, and all the comments are, "How can you be too consistent?" You can. You can be too good at your job, and people don't notice because people love a story. And David Raya. Okay, maybe the first couple games when he comes in, there's a few moments, maybe the flat with Mudryk away at Stamford Bridge, it's maybe first 10 to 15 games at Arsenal. Since the beginning of sort of halfway through last season to now, David Raya, I will put my hand on my chest and I'll say this out loud, he's been the best goalkeeper in the Premier League. In that sample, Alisson's been in and out of the team, maybe probably overall on his day, if you just put them up against each other, he's a better goalkeeper. But in terms of form, in terms of impact on the team, some of those saves yesterday, we're not even talking about them, but they are unbelievable. Yeah. That reaction save from the corner, that Marmoush, by the way, who's going to be a real weapon for them on corners, that's a Declan Rice corner, that. And that's going straight in, and he saves us, and I want to give him his flowers.
Do you know what it is, right? I actually slightly disagree in terms of Raya and how he's viewed, because I would say before this season, a lot of Arsenal fans would have said the defensive qualities of Arsenal last season and the number of goals that we conceded was down primarily to Gabriel, Saliba, and Declan Rice. And obviously they had a massive part to that, but what David Raya offered to the team in terms of minimising the number of shots he had to face, that was underestimated in terms of his influence on the ball, the aggressiveness in how he sweeps, his proactive ability to claim crosses. So he didn't get the credit he deserved it, and I felt there was a lot of concerns over David Raya's actual shot-stopping abilities. I reckon if you look at some of the tweets after when David Raya was announced having the Golden Glove, a lot of people felt that he didn't deserve it because he didn't do anything, which was absolute nonsense anyway. Because David Raya at Brentford, if you watched him at Brentford, he was one of the best shot-stopping goalkeepers in the league for 2 consecutive seasons under high volume. And this season, we all know how good he is as a modern day goalkeeper. The ball at his feet, what he's able to do, like I said, with claiming crosses. But this season, it's the big saves and it's the traditional aspects of his goalkeeping that have really stood out and that have really got people's attention of, wow, he's actually the guy. And we are going to have a conversation of when we look at Mikel Arteta's best signings in his tenure. So far, you look at Gabriel.
30 million.
Yes,
pounds.
This is what I mean. Value for money. So you look at Gabriel, you look at Ødegaard. David Raya is coming into that category as well, because what he's offering this team in all aspects is crazy. And I'm happy he's got a bit of a mention because he's been making saves at crucial moments as well. It's not saves at 2-0 or 3-0. It's saves when the game state is either a losing one or it's an even one. And he deserves massive praise.
So a lot of people talk about him being proactive in terms of the cross claiming, right? Like we can all attribute stats to that. We can see it. We see it quite well, right? I think his reaction time is incredibly underrated for what people see. And it's what results for me in his ability to get there. I mean, he is a more slight frame goalkeeper in terms of 5'10", but we're looking at, you mentioned the corner, mate. I forget who it was, but there was that snapshot later in the second half that he goes down to his right-hand side that keeps them out at 1-1. I forget who does it, but that for me was the most impressive save of the lot. And Savia, yes. And it's because his reading of things and his reaction time to making a decision is so much quicker than most people in the world. That comes out in his cross-claiming, comes out in his 1v1 sweeping, his decision to commit, to go, like the decision and the reaction time to take in the situation, react to it and kind of adapt and show it is what's key to me. And I don't know, I wanted to ask you guys, like genuinely, we keep wanting to be kind of cute about best in the Prem a little bit. I'm going to go and claim best in the world. How many goalkeepers have outperformed David Raya this season? You're talking about what? Is it Courtois?
I'll be real. I just don't watch enough outside of the Prem.
It's the same for me as well. Like, yeah, that's the.
So I'd definitely say Prem.
But definitely, you could definitely say at baseline, right, without me focusing too much on the other leagues, top 5. Like Well, that's actually unfair to David Raya, like top 3 or top 2.
That's what I'm trying to make the claim at, because just factually, have a big look at all the big teams in the world. What, you want to talk about Mike Magnan? You want to talk about what? PSG? Get all your top winners. Bayern, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Ter Stegen. Like, for me, David Raya has been one of the best performing keepers in the world, and he does deserve praise. It's been huge. I do want to end on this. I think Arsenal, though, have also cracked the code on goalkeeping scouting in general. David Raya has been so good. They have shown them a level of the future. And you start to look at some of the targets that we've been linked with in terms of Juan Garcia, who, by the way, is the best performing La Liga goalkeeper currently in this season. And, you look at even Bijol from PSV as well, who was excelling and did a brilliant job, by the way. Like, we have gone through a period of austerity where we, quote unquote, wasted cash, from Leno to Martinez to Ramsdale to finally seeing David Raya. Okay. And I think that we've really cracked the code on the scouting of that, because every single link that we had is a goalkeeper that is now excelling. And I think that's going to be worth some serious gold.
And I think he's always wanted Raya as well, hasn't he? I think from the get-go, it was...
I was literally about to say, the frustrating part is he's always wanted him. It took him 3 years. So when you're sat in a January window and you haven't made a signing, it's like, well, he wants his long-term targets. And you can see how Raya's worked out.
Can we praise Inaki Kana, though? Because, so I know we want to attribute it to Mikel.
No, it's Iñaki as well. But
I want to be fair, because I feel like it's Inaki because, again, he's the one that has played with Raya before. He was the one really promoting it to Mikel. And then when you go on beyond it, the big training that he's done to specifically improve Raya beyond that and identify the traits, I think is coming from Inaki Kana, who, for me, got a lot of rightful stick for some of the low-budget choices that he made. But as a whole... You're looking at it now, mate, like, Juan Garcia for me, I don't think that's a Mikel that's Inaki Kana for me, pushing that and saying, look, Mikel, you got to get this kid. He is the prototype to what we're seeing with David Raya. And so I think building that relationship is key, because he's one of the few on the goalkeeping staff. When you talk about Nicholas Jover, I want to talk about Kana in terms of how much points he may have saved, in terms of pushing the Raya, in terms of pushing Juan Garcia. Identifying that profile is huge. It's just as huge as Jover creating an identity on set pieces. It's just as huge as Carlos Cuesta creating an identity of player management, being maybe the player-to-player conversationalist that nobody on the coaching staff has. And I just want to end. I really hope we get extension news from these guys soon, because I think Albert Stuyvenberg, Carlos Cuesta, these guys are so good. People are going to start offering first team positions for Mikel's staff, and we're going to have to replace. We're going to have to look at that in the summer. I foresee that as a potential issue.
For sure. I think, just to close that out before we have some questions, I think what's nice, though, is we have exactly what we know Mikel wants as a goalkeeper. I can't imagine him... It's like the archetype. So you can kind of, probably part of the scouting is going, we've got this. This is exactly what we want. We can profile that and detail that and data that to the nth degree, and then match everyone up against it and kind of work on that. So I think that's obviously helpful. Yeah. I also just want to finish on, I said this on Saturday Social as well, but I think people underestimate how much Raya backs himself and would be part of this list of players, like I said earlier, who are just walking into a Champions League final like, I'm fine. Like he said, in his all-time goalkeepers, he put his handling better than anyone. He was saying, like, distribution, Edison, Casillas, Van der Sar, whatever. Handling, he put himself. He proper believes in himself. I think that's maybe underrated.
Do you think there's something, just really quick, do you think there's something of these players who have gone through the lower leagues in England, and that...
Ben White.
Yeah, like Ben White. There's a lot of examples there. Yeah.
There's something in that. Let's do a few questions before we close out. Might do these quite quickly. So let's see if we can get through some. SJB on the Discord says, in the wake of another Big Six victory and both Arsenal's general form, home form and overall form versus the Big Six, our issues in games tend to come versus the Tier 2 teams in the Prem, such as Villa, Brighton, Newcastle, etc. Do you think we're doing enough as a team to combat this, or is this an area we need to recruit for? Is this a weakness in Arteta's game that needs to work more at?
I think, for me, it's not a case of looking at isolated games, it's looking at clusters. That's what I've always felt has been our Achilles heel under Mikel. Now, you could argue that most teams, or pretty much every team, gets clusters, but I think the moment in which we're able to kind of deny clusters from kind of affecting our entire season is when that's the big problem that I think we have. Like we look back at last season, it's that December period in which we dropped points in 3 consecutive games. We've done it a fair few times this season as well. So I don't really look at it as a case of, yes, there's a stylistic type of team that we have struggled against in terms of those physical mid blocks, but generally speaking, I think it's just like the trend of games in which we drop points in is the problem that we have.
I think sometimes we're just too smart for our own good. I won't make this long. I mean, I don't look at a particular team now where I say, oh, that's the game state that Arsenal struggle in specifically. Like, I've seen a huge improvement in central access since basically Everton, as far back as this season. And so I think we've got the tools to beat it, but it's like you said, Rohan, I think it's that cluster loss, which happened last year in December. In terms of this season, it was stemming that. And then Mikel's ability to adapt to those things and change something, his reaction time is slow. He always sees the problem. We always say it, but his reaction time is slow. And I think you're just going to wait for him to grow and just grow up as an experience to really improve that.
Yep. Question from Diddy on the Discord, who says, do you think this team is more equipped for cup competitions or the league? If it's the former, why have we struggled in cups during Arteta's tenure?
Fair question, but I don't think we've prioritized the cups, like what people want, and I don't agree with it. But I don't believe that Mikel has prioritized the cups as much as he should have. I think that when you look at this team, if you're the best pressing team in the world and the best defensive record team in the world, you're going to always do well in cups. At fundamentally one game, if you're looking at a 1 game sample, don't concede, better chance to win. And so by nature, you're going to be better at cup competitions. But I also just don't agree with this idea that, we're not a league team. I mean, if you look at the last 100 games in the Premier League, Arsenal lead the league in points. So
yeah, I'd say we are a league team. I think the cup competitions. Both. Yeah. But I think, when it comes to the cups, maybe it's a case of, that efficiency between both boxes, that what Mikel alludes to many times. And it's like the Newcastle game, right? We did the rewatch for that, Alex, didn't we? We both said about how Newcastle played a really good game. But ultimately, we had big chances and we didn't take them. And sometimes it is as simple as that. When you get opportunities coming your way in one-off games, obviously it's not a one-off game. You have to take them, Whereas in the league, you can kind of rectify that because you've got a larger sample size of games to kind of build that ground back up if you do drop points. So,
yeah. Final one from Ivan on X, who says, with Nwaneri coming through, is a winger still a big need for the summer, or is it something we can put on hold until we sell Trossard? Look, I want Martinelli at right wing to work. I don't think it works. And I want Nwaneri there. More consistently. I think
do you not think he's had some good games there,
Alex?
I think he's had some good games there. Every time he's played there, I think
when you
good.
don't have Saka, and you're not supplementing it somewhere else, you need that thrust from somewhere, and Nwaneri is the closest to it, in my opinion. I think as George has alluded to before, especially when we get White back, it's the closest to Saka. If you're playing in a different way, I'm open to it, but I just don't think it's worked. I think you lose something putting Martinelli out on the right as opposed to the left, even though Trossard's been brilliant. I will say, I think maybe we've we've reduced the need for a Saka backup, although I'm doing air quotes and I've never quite sort of bought that. I think hopefully people will stop asking about that because that is absolutely Ethan Nwaneri. That is top quality.
All I want is immediate impact. For me, Ethan Nwaneri is immediate impact at right wing. I've seen it. It can be an option, right? I do think the wingers, though, are absolutely a key in the squad. I don't agree with this idea that even with Ethan coming in and say he's your Saka backup right wing and you're like, okay, that's in the squad building, check. I distinctly feel that somebody who is on the wing, able to create separation from any side of the pitch and have a level of running power to really compete in long distances in transition, as well as against a low block, is something that we need from wide areas. We need dynamic separation there. So regardless, I think a winger is a crux pillar signing. I will say that. I'm open to what that looks like and what kind of a winger it can be, but crucially, they must have transitional inevitability, and that's my buzzword done for the day.
Oh, imagine we got
Thanks for the
Rafinha.
password, George.
Imagine we got Rafinha.
Well, mate, there's still, as we record, 3 hours to go.
3 hours
so
to
you
go.
never know. Final question from Simon Says Hypnosis. Where do you think Erling Haaland scored on the honesty to humility factor on the Hexaco model of personality at 4:30 p.m. yesterday versus his score at 6:30 p.m. yesterday? Simon, I'll be real. I don't really understand what that means. But fuck Erling Haaland.
And his dad's gone off on one, hasn't he, as well?
Oh,
Arsenal
Alfie.
fan. Arsenal fan.
Is he?
Have you seen this? He's an Arsenal fan. He used to write in Norway about how much he loves Arsenal.
Wow.
Jeez.
Bunch of mugs.
But I mean, it's his son, isn't it? So
Stay humble, eh? Stay humble, eh? Look, we'll do. As we're recording, we're about to jump live, so we'll talk transfers on there. So check out that, which will be out after this. Before this. So yeah, we'll talk all that stuff over there. But that was an unbelievable win at the weekend. Really pleased with that. We're now, I think, unbeaten in 14 or something in the league. Our league form is frustrating because obviously of what's happening with Liverpool, but we are still in the hunt. We're still there. It's not over till it's over, he says, trying to find some copium. Thank you, boys.
Thank you, good sir.
nice one.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And thanks for keeping it Arsenal.